Hello, Michael. Good to meet you. How are you?
Doing fine, thank you. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
I hear you. Sometimes there's some background voice or something, but I hear you. Perfect. Hi. Hi.
Good to meet you.
Good to meet you too. Thank you. How are you feeling better?
Yes, thank you.
Ah,
Much better.
good to hear. Good to hear. So we are waiting for Jayne. She will come on the call shortly, and then my co-host Lauren will also jump in. She will monitor the chat room and drop some links here and then, and make sure that in case my internet connection breaks for some reason, the call is not affected by it.
Sounds fine.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here with us tonight.
You're welcome. Good morning. I'm going to refill my coffee and be right back.
Absolutely.
Hello. Can you still hear me?
Yes, perfect.
All right, thank you.
Hi there. Hopefully you can hear me, and I'm hoping very soon you can see me. Can you hear me?
We can perfectly hear you. We can't see you yet.
I know you can't see me now. I know. My computer is saying it can't start the video. This is called Sod's Law. Sorry, I'm a little bit late. And hello, Michael. I couldn't find the Zoom link. Let me leave the meeting and start again, okay?
Okay. Lauren, are you there?
Hi, yeah, I'm just trying to do the background settings of it.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Is it you that will drop the donation links casually here and there?
Yes. Do you have it on your computer? Because I haven't had it sent to me.
I have it. I don't.
Is it on the Eventbrite?
It's not on the event script itself. Let me check. So I send you the links that I get that are on the event.
Hi, Gabriel. Sorry, I was waiting in the Zoom room. There we go.
There we go. Perfect. Hi, how are you doing?
I'm good. Michael, lovely to meet you. I'm sorry it's taken this to bring us together. And I know we've got a few minutes. Do you want to talk through, I'm sure you were talking through how you want to handle this, Gabriel?
Yes, exactly. So Lauren is the co-host. She will make sure, she will surveil the chat room and make sure that all the technical aspects are met. I will start shortly with a little background information about ReportOUT and about the event. And then at the end of this, I will pass the word to you in order so you can introduce yourself shortly before we start with the questions. Is that all right for you?
Sounds good.
Perfect. Are there any questions left?
So you're just going to try and go through, I mean, I have to be honest, how long is the session, Gabriel? 9 questions is quite...
We will not, yeah, we will not make all the questions. I just wrote down more in case, just as backup. I think we are going to the essential ones about what conversion therapy is, maybe the phases, and then I would like to end on the note why it is taking so long for certain states to apply measures against conversion therapy.
Great. If it helps, I don't know how Michael does this, but I have 3 slides, or actually 4 slides I tend to use when I describe what conversion therapy is, particularly in a faith-based setting.
Yeah.
So if that would help, I mean, you could perhaps, and if Michael didn't mind, maybe start perhaps with myself and in asking that question, and then perhaps Michael can add some comments. You know, if he, I've also done quite a lot of research. I don't know how much you know, Gabriel, about both of this, but you know, I've got quite a lot of statistics around what survivors have been through and what the impact on them has been. I wasn't assuming we'd get into that much detail. Well, we could do, but I'm not sure we'd be able to do your questions and all that. So I can always what's the word I want? Use one of those charts. I've got them to hand. If in one of your answers we want to talk about, well, what was the impact of conversion therapy, or you know, what age are people, or why did they go through it, all that sort of stuff. So
yeah, that would be interesting. I can make you co-host so you can share your screen at the given moment. Great.
And Michael, I am truly sorry we haven't had a chance to meet properly. I've heard a lot about you from my friend Jeremy Marks, I think, who you know well. Yes. Perhaps after this call, you and I, not today, but we could perhaps, I'd really appreciate a chance to talk in more depth about both our work and ministry, if that's okay. Sorry to come late.
You're on mute, Michael.
Can't hear you, Michael, I'm afraid. You need to unmute. So you do that by, there's a microphone.
How's that?
That's great.
Okay. Yes, I met Jeremy for the first time face-to-face in 2007, I believe, in Los Angeles, when we were issuing our first public apology, our first statement.
Yes, no, ironically, that was about the time I re-linked with him, having just come out after 30 years of conversion therapy. I don't know, we have similar stories. So, and I was a very senior evangelical over here, but Jeremy really is the reason why I'm still here. I think, like many of us, if I hadn't have met him along the way, yeah. And Gabriel, I think that's, forgive me, because I know you're really new to this, and it's a bit, well, from what you've shared. I think the human aspect of what our own stories are, I mean, I can talk in general terms, and I'm sure Michael can, and all the people we've met along the way, but if you want, yeah, I'm quite happy to share some of my story to a point. Obviously I'm not, but that will help.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much. That would be great.
Do you know how many people we've got?
Sorry?
Hey, Michael, you were going to ask how many people are coming today?
I don't know the statistics. I heard that the last time we sold around 50 tickets. We will see how many actually join.
Have both of you seen the Netflix documentary Pray Away?
Thank you. That's where I saw you. And to be fair, I don't know if if Drew has explained this, but it's in watching that Netflix that he thought, I'm going to reach out to you, Michael.
Thank
So I've known Drew for some time. And I, rather naughtily perhaps, but I videoed, there was one key moment, forgive me, it's a while back now, where you said something really, well, you said lots of things that were very powerful, but there was one thing in particular which I thought was extremely, so I videoed it and stuck it on Twitter. I have quite a large following over here trying to ban conversion therapy, but I will find it shortly and let you know. Gabriel, did you say you'd sold tickets?
That's just a technical term. They are free of charge. Yeah.
I was going to say, if you're selling, then yeah.
Yeah. No, they are.
Charge quite a lot to talk, so I've done it free for Drew as a favour. But yeah.
No, sorry about that. Yeah, they are indeed free of charge.
Okay. But I think what Michael's rightly saying, you really need to plug the Netflix documentary, because I think that goes into as much detail as anybody can.
Yeah.
Michael won't know, but I've written a few pieces for the national media op-eds and stuff, and I've plugged it quite hard there too.
Right.
So.
I think it's especially powerful because you have 5 former leaders all denouncing it and sharing their own personal stories, and it gives a good historical context as well. It was well done.
It was beautifully done. Very
hard
powerful.
to watch. Very powerful. I was crying.
Well, it triggered me. Yeah, it reminded. I mean, you and I have so much. That's why we have a lot in common, but obviously, but the trouble is always the people who need to watch it are the least likely. But and Gabriel, if I may, at the end, I've got a documentary stroke program going out tomorrow night where I've been put head to head with the head of Evangelical Alliance on conversion therapy, and that goes out at 6 o'clock tomorrow night.
Oh.
It's quite difficult to record, actually. But anyway, so I'd love to point people in that direction.
Yeah, please, absolutely. Should we? It's 6 o'clock. Should we start letting people in? All right. I'm going to mute myself for a bit, and I'm looking forward to this.
Is there anyone else on the panel?
Gabriel, just one sec.
Yeah.
The link that you're asking me about, is it just the donation link to ReportOUT? I don't know what you're on about.
Yeah, I saw in the event script that casually we drop a donation link, but I think
that's fine. I know what you're on about now.
Yeah, I think there is one. It is anyway on the website. So if we put the link for the website, I think that should be enough.
Right. It's lovely to meet you, Jayne and Michael. I'm Lauren. I'll be just working in the background on the technical.
Thanks, Lauren. Can I just understand, you're recording as well, so you're going to make this available to people offline, hopefully?
Yeah, it goes onto YouTube. I can make sure a link's sent to you when it gets put up.
It just strikes me, looking at your waiting room, you've only got 13 people there, and for someone like Michael speaking, this needs to get a lot more coverage, really.
Yeah, it all goes onto our YouTube channel, so the whole talk will be available on there for people to watch as well. And then when it gets put up on the YouTube, it gets promoted on our social media that it's on the YouTube as well.
Okay, good.
I'll start to let people in now, Gabriel.
Okay. Can you also make sure about the recording?
Yeah, it's recording.
Perfect, thanks.
Enabling postal access to it.
Okay, let's wait one more minute maybe, and then we will start, hoping that everybody who wanted to attend was able to join. Okay, I think we are ready to go. So I would like to welcome all who have attended. Can you hear me all? Is the connection
Yes.
good? Thank you very much. My name is Gabriele Guzzi, and I am a volunteer with the fundraising and event teams at ReportOUT. A warm welcome to our event, of which a recording can be found on our YouTube channel afterwards. Just a little bit about us. ReportOUT is a global human rights organization for sexual and gender minorities, and we are based in the UK. ReportOUT research, monitor, and record human rights abuses against sexual and gender identity minorities. We then use this to educate people and campaign about the human rights of people in every single nation state. We are entirely volunteer-led and have a team of over 50 volunteers currently who help us to work. For further details, please see our website, and we will insert the link to our website in the chat box. We have a range of previous events on our YouTube channel for you to watch, which discuss with discussion panelists from nation states such as Mongolia, Ghana, Russia, and the Cayman Islands, or even wider regional areas such as South Asia, and historical talks such as the Men in the Pink Triangle under Nazi Germany. Please check us out under the following YouTube link that will be inserted in the chat box. If you want to sign up to the event sooner than other people, please sign up to our email list, which has exclusive events coming up soon. The link can be found on our website, and will be dropped in the chat box throughout this talk. Our donation link will also be dropped or can be found on our website. We are entirely volunteer-led once again, and small charities like us could always do with your support, and your donations will go directly to the work that we do. Thank you very much. But I don't want to talk about us all day, all evening. I would like to extend the word to our dear guest speakers, Jayne Ozanne and Michael Bassi, who we are very thrilled to have you tonight with us. Would you like to shortly introduce yourself? Jayne, would you like to go first?
Okay, thank you, Gabriel, and welcome everybody. I'm Jayne Ozanne. I lead something called the Ozan Foundation, founded in my name. I work with senior religious leaders around the world to tackle discrimination and prejudice on the grounds of sexuality and gender. In 2020, we set up the Global Interfaith Commission on LGBT Lives, where we brought together senior religious leaders around the world to make a declaration to apologize for the harm that religion had caused, to call for an end on violence, and specifically to call for an end on of conversion therapy. And this built on work I did back over the years, where many of you may know I used to sit on the government's LGBT Advisory Panel, trying to campaign and push for a ban on conversion therapy. And that was because in 2017, we had a ban agreed by the Church of England. This is all personal to me, and I think we'll unpack this a bit, Gabriel, this evening. I grew up as a strong evangelical Christian woman, believing that it was absolutely impossible to be gay and be Christian. And I put myself through nearly 20 years of conversion therapy, and it sadly left me fighting for my life more than once. And so this is something that is both personal, but also I know foundational to the well-being of LGBT people around the world. And that's what I work to try and ensure that we can safeguard them from harm. Thank you.
Thank you for those words, Jayne. Michael?
Hi, thank you for having me participate today. My name is Michael Bussey, and back in 1976, I was one of a small group of people that founded Exodus International. Exodus International just started out as a small handful of loosely affiliated ministries that were dedicated to the idea that change was possible, and if you had enough faith, you could uncover your latent heterosexuality. If you prayed enough, if you studied enough. And I believed that. I was a rather new evangelical Christian, but I believed the miracles and the preaching that such change was possible. That organization, Exodus International, eventually grew to be the world's largest ministry or collection of ministries that were doing conversion therapy. Of course, at that time, they didn't call it conversion therapy. We didn't like the word therapy or conversion at all. We called it something else. And our emphasis wasn't really so much on changing orientation as it was leading faithful Christian lives and just sort of leaving the change up to God. But after just 3 years of being part of the organization from its founding in 1976 until I left in 1979, just 3 years later, it became clear to me that nobody that I was working with in our small support groups, no one was changing. No one was becoming straight, including myself. And that what we were becoming was more guilt-laden and anxious and depressed. And I finally realized I just had to stop my participation. And I went underground for about 10 years, kept it quiet because I knew I'd be rejected by the church community. But then I began speaking out publicly against conversion therapy and ex-gay programs. And I've done that now for 4 decades. A very strong advocate for bans against the practice, and part of a community of people who are recovering from conversion therapy. I help lead some groups on Facebook. So I'm happy to be here and share my own personal experience and answer any questions folks might have.
Thank you very much. Maybe on this note, what is to be understood under conversion therapy? Is it a monolithic concept, or are there different forms of conversion therapy? Yes.
Thanks, Garo. Key question, and different people on this call will have perhaps different insights. As Michael's already said, it's far from therapy. If anything, I try and ban that word too. It's any practice, anything that's done to an individual to try and change, cure, or suppress their sexuality or gender identity. And by suppress, I mean trying to pretend that, knowing that they can't change their orientation, but trying to make them walk or be more masculine and to live a celibate life or marry someone of the opposite sex and pretend to be straight. I'm just going to share a couple of slides, I think, because by far and away the most common, well, there are various forms of conversion therapy. It's really an umbrella term for anything that ranges from talking therapies, prayer, we've already heard Michael mention, hypnosis, aversion therapies, deliverance ministries. Corrective rape is just one of the most violent and horrific forms, and we know that is happening here in the UK and indeed abroad. But as you can see, an umbrella term that captures all different forms. But in a religious context, and from my own experience, I tend to talk about it in 3 phases. And the first phrase, which for many of us, oh dear, you're getting a peek at the second phrase there, it's dangers of doing PowerPoint with a mouse. The first phase, which for many of us, often we never come out, is that private phase of carrying this huge burden of knowing that we believe that we are an abomination, or that we are unacceptable. High levels of shame and anxiety, where we don't tell anyone because we know that we will be ostracized or rejected or judged. And so we put ourselves through all sorts of private prayer, fasting, plea bargaining, you know, begging God, if only I can be a really good Christian, God, you will change me. And it is an extremely lonely path, and that isolation is what causes so much of the damage, certainly the mental health damage to me. And often that phase comes to an end where either someone, as in my case, has a breakdown where their body begins to crack under the strain, and I myself found myself in hospital with my body physically challenged by the pain of it all, but also mentally having a breakdown. Or they're outed perhaps by a jealous rival or a sibling. But that often takes them into what I call phase 2. And this is where you start reaching out to your immediate church community for help. Loving, kind family and church members often will come alongside you and pray that God will heal you. There is a deep belief that something must have happened to you to make you have these feelings, and perhaps you had an overly close relationship with one of your parents, or an overly distant one, that perhaps you were sexually abused, or you dabbled in sex too early. There's all sorts of sort of weird and wonderful theories. And that prayer is done in love. So much of the films these days seem to show that it's, you know, a scary horror movie. No, this is done by people you trust and know. But deep down, you know that prayer isn't working, and you so desperately want it to, because they are so desperate for it to work, that you go along with it. And so much can often be about needing to live a good Christian life. So there'll be a belief that it's because you're being slightly sinful that God's not healing you. Ultimately, it's the weight of the expectation, the weight of the shame, and the weight of trying to live the perfect Christian life that again starts to crush people. And many will then seek out far more specialized ministries. I went through years of deliverance, of exorcisms, of anybody who believed they had a special gift who could help cure me. I gave thousands of pounds. I didn't necessarily pay for it, but you're always encouraged to give what you believe is godly and good to help the ministry concerned. And obviously the idea is the more that you give, the more that God might want to bless you. So I, as someone who didn't at the time have an income, gave away quite a lot of money, trying desperately to find the key that would unlock my healing and allow me to live a fulfilled heterosexual life. In my case, sadly, that brought me to hospital a second time and a second breakdown. And at that stage, I knew that I had a very stark choice to make. Either I needed to try and face and accept who I was, but I believe that meant I was going to be walking away from God, or I had to take my life, which sounds drastic, but is the choice that so many of us end up thinking that we have to face. And the cost of coming out was exceptionally high. I was a very senior evangelical, and coming out meant I lost most of my family and friends and work prospects and all the things that go with the community that you live. Luckily, many over the years, particularly my family members, have come back and embraced who I am. But that is why so many of us know this is so damaging, and particularly for young LGBT people, where their whole family's secure livelihood comes from accepting the teaching that they're given and putting themselves through conversion therapy. That's why this is so dangerous. Sorry if that was a bit long, but I think it goes to the core of what we're talking about tonight.
I think I could have stated that any better. That perfectly described it. That silent struggle before you reach out, where you're afraid to tell anyone. I knew that I had these feelings from the time I was a little boy, and not being able to ask anybody or talk to anybody about it, I went to the only place I could think of, which was the Riverside Public Library. And there were only 4 or 5 books at that time. This was the early 60s, and every one of the books agreed that there was something terribly wrong with me. Books were in the abnormal psychology section, and you had to ask the librarian special permission to read them. So I, early on, knew these feelings, and also was being told by what I was reading that there was something pathological or dysfunctional about it. So I set out on this private struggle, starting at age 12, to figure out a way to fix it. It was broken. Maybe there was a bad relationship with my parents. I had troubles with my parents, but everybody does. But I looked for those episodes of conflict and blamed, oh, that must be it. That's that one time my dad scolded me too harshly and that made me gay. I had no other information to gauge that by. And the books kind of promoted those kind of philosophies that there was something broken about you and it was probably your parents' fault, or as Jayne mentioned, abuse, which I never experienced growing up. So when I became a Christian, I had attended a church that believed in the power of miracles. They believed it was a neo-Pentecostal, neo-charismatic church that believed that in a doctrine that I call name it and claim it. And the idea was that if you named the thing you were looking for God, if you said it out loud, God, give me a new job, God, help me to find the right partner, God, increase my salary. If you had enough faith, God would honor that faith and give you the thing that you would name it and claim it. And the message that you got either overtly or subtly was that if you weren't getting it, there was something wrong with you and there was something wrong with your faith. And so that just compounds the guilt. You try harder and harder and harder. Eventually, I started leading a small group because someone told me if I reached out and tried to do ministry, maybe God would honor that. So, but of course, I saw that people were just becoming more and more depressed. And I finally had my breakdown and had to walk away, which meant walking away from everyone and everything I had believed up to that point. It was a very traumatic thing to do, but I knew I had to do it or die. So thank you, Jayne, for expressing those phases so well.
Thank you for these answers. They are very touching. So what are the processes in these different conversion therapies? What happens to a person? Are there, you mentioned praying for somebody's salvation, giving money. Are there, what are other aspects of conversion therapy?
Well, attempts to change orientation go way back. They go back decades, and we're not necessarily grounded in religious programs. Psychiatrists and psychologists tried various methods to alter people's orientation, including some of the things Jayne mentioned, like aversion therapy, where a patient would be given a medication that would make them ill if they responded to gay stimuli, or electroshock therapy, or even lobotomies. And those kinds of techniques are the ones that catch the public attention most, and people assume, oh, that's what goes on in conversion therapy at these churches. And that's not so. It's much more this repetitive message that there is something spiritually wrong with you. Have enough faith and work hard enough, pray hard enough, fast enough, read the Bible enough, go to enough church services that you're never enough. So never, ever enough. The message, the unspoken message is if you don't change, there's something wrong with you. But you already believed. So it just makes it doubles the pain, it triples the pain. And a lot of these participants just cave into that. I witnessed suicide attempts. I had people engage in excessive drug and alcohol abuse. All sorts of self-destructive behavior comes from that kind of belief that there's something wrong with you, something desperately wrong. So people are, I think, startled by some of the older techniques that were physical, the physically abusive kind of techniques, but the mental indoctrination is just as, and maybe even more profound, because that gets in deep to your sense of self and your sense of belonging. And I still counsel people who've been out of these programs for 40 years and they're still dealing with those issues.
Thank you, Michael. I don't know if it would help, Gabriel. We did some research back in 2018 amongst on faith and sexuality. It's one of the biggest surveys that have been done, and the idea was to try and reach people who'd been through some form of religious conversion therapy, or indeed any form, but to try and understand why they'd gone through it, what had happened to them, you know, what they'd been through, and indeed what the impact on them had been. And we repeated that research 2 years ago amongst the trans community. I think for time, the results are very similar, apart from the fact that our trans friends sadly are far more likely to be put through conversion therapy, and the forms of it can be far more violent. But as many of those of you who are from the UK on the call will know, we're in the middle of trying to get the government to finally ban it here, and they're looking at proposals. And one of the things they're saying is that they will ban it for anyone who's been forced through it, but they won't ban it necessarily for those who volunteer to go through it. And which is to me the vast majority of these people. So we had about 468 people who'd been through conversion therapy, and as you can see, I'm going to show you some graphs quickly. Those who'd voluntarily considered it were about 15%, and those who were forced through it were about 3.5%. Now, it's awful to think that 76 people were forced, but the truth is most of us volunteer because we think it's the right thing to do, and everyone around us thinks it's the right thing to do. And it's the religious leader, that's the yellow line there, who is often the key influencing factor, as Michael has said, or indeed religious friends. Often it can be parents and family members, but by far, it's very rarely in the UK now, anything from the, in fact, all the medical professionals have got together to condemn conversion therapy. So this is primarily a religious thing. And the person people went to were religious leaders rather than the medical professionals. I'm going to skip through some of these. And one of the things that really shocked me, and I think shows how important this is that the age that people are going through this, over half of them are under 18. So we're talking about children. And you can see there that there are some under the age of 12, which is even worse. This is when they start. And then about a third are young adults, that years when they've just left home, often gone to university, trying to find their way, perhaps having their first major sexual, relationship or experience, and realizing they're gay. So young adults, and these are people who are the most vulnerable in our society, and that's why this is so important. Why did they go through it? Well, again, often religious reasons. 72%, nearly 3/4 of them saying because they thought who they were was sinful. The light blue line there, ashamed of their desires, nearly 2/3, this level of shame, which is utterly crushing. And over half saying they wanted to live a straight life because that's what they thought was acceptable, or because their religious leader disapproved. So you can see the role that religion in particular, and I speak as a Christian, so it's not all religions, but can play in this. And then what was the result? And these figures, I'm afraid, are the worst. When you see there the level of suicidal thoughts, nearly 2/3 had thought about taking their lives. And perhaps even worse, a third had attempted taking their lives. And of course, the figure we can't measure and we don't know is how many actually did take their lives. And yet many of us, perhaps many on this call, will have friends, will know people who are not with us anymore, because they found the burden of this too much. And in my own foundation, my treasurer, her daughter took her life in the most tragic circumstances because she believed that who she was unacceptable. So, Gabriel, to your question, I think we'd already unpacked the different forms, but I think we need to understand why people are going through this and what the impact on them is. And I hope that helps understand it a bit more.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as your research showed, there seems to be a great importance of religion and this sense of belonging vis-a-vis the doctrine that plays a role in conversion therapy. And you two being deeply involved, and as I understood, having between brackets volunteered, when and why did your perception of conversion therapies change? Was there a specific moment where the whole world looked different? How was that?
Are you asking about when I realized that it wasn't working and I needed to change direction?
Yes,
Was it a
exactly.
particular event? Was it a particular thing? It was actually an accumulation of things. I think, first of all, decades of denying who I was. You can live in denial just so long, and eventually it starts taking a toll physically. And you start feeling sick, you start feeling anxious, you are sick and anxious. The energy of having to put on a different persona and pretend that you're straight, so that because you're worried what would happen if anybody found out. The weight of that just becomes unbearable after a while. So just the pressure of trying for so long, failing for so long built up. Plus, I was a group leader, and I was hoping to see some encouraging signs of change in the people that I was counseling at our weekly Bible study, prayer, and counseling sessions. And none of them were changing, except that their depression and anxiety was getting even deeper. Another thing that led to me finally breaking away was increasing report among them of those suicidal ideations, those suicidal thoughts, even suicidal attempts like overdoses. That I thought, this isn't changing people. This is slowly killing them. And then a couple of final things. One was I had gotten married to a woman because she also believed that if we had enough faith, God would change me. I had a daughter. I realized I was going to have to leave this marriage and I was going to have to leave my child. That became very painful. At the same time, I found that I was falling in love with one of the men in our group. Falling in love completely for the very first time in my life, not just emotionally, but also spiritually and sexually. It was the real deal, and I couldn't deny it anymore. I couldn't pretend to be straight when I was obviously gay. And probably the final straw was I had a young man who had a fall. This was a common thing. You'd go to the group and you'd admit that you had failed and that you had slipped, and that was called a fall. And he came to me and told me that as a result of his little slip, he had gone home, taken a razor blade to his genitals and repeatedly slashed himself and then put drain cleaner on the wounds. So my heart, I couldn't take it anymore. I just emotionally and spiritually collapsed. And I thought, I've got to start telling the truth, even if that sends me to hell. Because I'm already in hell, So I've got to tell the truth. And that meant losing, as I expected, losing my support group. That meant losing friends and family and being rejected by the church that claimed to love me so much. That was very, very painful. Luckily, I had my partner, Gary, and we buckled down and formed a relationship and lived very happily until his death of AIDS several years later. So for me, it was an accumulation of those things that finally broke through my denial. I had to reevaluate my entire faith, which I'm continuing to do even to this day. My faith keeps changing as I discover more about myself in good ways.
Gosh, thank you, Michael. And isn't love a wonderful thing? I talk about how the universe just bursts into color, and until you've truly experienced it, you don't know what it is. I spent many years being taught in my loving church to fear, that sex was a no-go area, and we always had negative teachings around relationships and sex. It was always about trying to control rather than trying to prepare people for the glory of what it is to be fully alive and to fully love. And for me, Gabriel, I put myself, as I was explained, willingly through years of conversion therapy. I was quite senior. Some of you will know I was on the Archbishops Council of the Church of England as a senior evangelical, and so I couldn't go to sort of large meetings. I didn't feel, well, I didn't want to be outed as someone who was struggling with this, so I'd go and seek one-on-one prayer support from some of the senior evangelical leaders I knew around the world. And I truly believed it had worked. I was living a life of what we call living by faith. I was not, I didn't have an income. I was praying that this may sound a bit dramatic to various folk, but I believe that if I was doing what God wanted me to do, then somehow the money would come in. And so I was really living at what we call the sharp end of religion. And I was meeting all these wonderful people who kept praying for me and believed that I was healed. And frankly, I was so busy, I didn't have time to meet anyone. But I believe that when I came off the Archbishops Council, and once I'd stepped down from a lot of the other international work I was doing, that God would introduce me to a man and that I would get happily married and live happily ever after. But instead, what happened was I moved to Oxford, and I was a long backstory. You can read about it in my book, Just Love. But I found myself at the university here doing some postgrad work in international diplomacy and religion. And on my first day on my conference of my course, I walked into the room and saw this extraordinary woman from, well, it doesn't really matter where she's from, but she happened to be Romanian. And I knew that the last 20 years of prayer had not worked a little bit, because I had fallen headlong and sinker in love with her again. Another straight woman, sadly for me. But at that point, I lost a lot of hope, because I just didn't believe there was a way out. If God hadn't healed me after all this time, after all I'd gone out, what could he expect of me? And I suppose I believed that God would have to forgive me. I needed to know who I was. I needed to understand if this desire I had to be loved and love a woman was something that would bring me joy and peace and happiness, or whether it was just a test, as I saw it, by the devil to get me off course. But I very shortly, so I dated some men and I dated some women, and I soon very quickly realized that it was very much women I was attracted to, and met an extraordinary woman who I was with for 7 years. And I became alive. And I think the only truth that one could see was the truth of love, was the truth of being known and accepted and loved, and knowing the beauty of intimacy. And everyone around me could see that too. I mean, they didn't know perhaps my whole story, but they could see that something had happened, because I suddenly had light in my eyes. And that's what my parents realized. Although they found this exceptionally difficult news to come to terms with, they could see the fruit. And those of you who have a perhaps faith on this call, it's the fruit that shines for itself, somebody fully alive and flourishing. But I then had to find a way of working out, well, where is my faith and where is God in all this? And I had to go back and unpack all that I had believed and why had I believed certain things. But I met extraordinary people along the way. Michael and I share a dear friend in someone called Jeremy Marks. But I'd love to say that overnight I suddenly had a sort of change of heart. I didn't. I struggled. I really needed to understand, was God with me in this, or was this level of internalized homophobia goes deep. You know, when you've lived it for 40 years, as I had, it takes years to unpack. But truth sets us free. And I think that's the biggest part. Michael talked about truth. You cannot live a lie. God does not call us, I believe, to live a lie, and God loves love. He created us to love and be loved, and everything he's created, I speak about God as he, but I could say she, I suppose. Everything that God has created is good and lovable. God doesn't make mistakes. And we need to learn to accept that. So that's part of the journey, sorry. But I think it's the fruit and the truth and the fact that I became alive that spoke for itself. Thank you.
The power of love. That's a beautiful note. Maybe to move it back on a more political level. You mentioned earlier that there have been ambiguous responses of states towards banning conversion therapy based on the argument that some join based on free will. Have nation states responded to banning conversion therapy generally responded quickly enough? And are there any exemplary examples? And on the other hand, why do nation states, maybe the UK specifically and the US, struggle with enforcing a ban on conversion therapy?
Gosh, how long have you got? Shall I start with that one? I'll try and give you, I mean, the bottom line is they struggle because the evangelical lobby and the Catholic lobby are very strong, and particularly in right-wing governments like our current Johnson government and Trump's government. It's slightly different under Biden, but the evangelical right-wing presence is very powerful. And whereas the nation may think it's obvious that conversion therapy needs to be banned, in fact, if you do a poll, most think it's already been banned. They don't understand why the government struggles so much. But it's because of the religious kickback. And, you know, for many years, this UK government only talked about wanting to end conversion therapy. It was very sneaky of them. They refused to use the word ban. The difference being that a ban requires legislation. End means that they just wanted to try and work with people to tell them it was a bad idea. Well, we knew it wasn't going to end without a ban, and that's why I've been working so closely with religious leaders and religious groups. So we've got the Church of England, the Methodist Church, the Quakers, the Hindu Council, the Buddhist Dharma Centre. You know, it goes on calling on the government for a ban because they know that they need a ban in order to hold their ministers to account. The best example, I think, or examples at the moment really are in Australia and New Zealand, and indeed in Canada, who've just passed legislation. There are other countries too, and here they've got a mix of what we call civil law and criminal law. And criminal means you get locked up, and you know it's what takes you to court. Civil protections are when people can see people are at risk and they intervene, because we're dealing with quite complex family situations oftentimes. You know, it's quite difficult to, and it needs hard power and soft power. So I've done a lot of work on this. If you're interested in this, look at my website, JayneOzanne.com. Last year, we produced a report which we call the Cooper Report. I'll put a link in the chat, produced by some of the most senior international human rights lawyers who came together to work with me to advise the government of how to effectively ban conversion therapy. And we tackled this issue of religious freedom, or rather why we believe that religious freedom sometimes needs to be curtailed where there's clear evidence of harm and where people are at risk of harm because of discrimination. And it's very clear to the legal profession that there needs to be a full ban with no loopholes. It's not, sadly, so clear to this government, and we're still working hard. And in fact, one of the things, if people are interested, I'd love them to do is to put in a response to the government's consultation that is still going on until the 4th of February, where they're asking for people to feed in their concerns about their proposals. And the current proposals allow loopholes that allow private prayer to continue, which means people continue to pray the gay away, and allows consent. That means that you can say that you want to go through it and therefore you're allowed to go through it, which is utterly meaningless in a world where so many of us believe it's the right thing to do because that's what we're taught. So long answer, but I'll put my links in the chat and you'll find all the links to all the work on banning conversion therapy. I lead the Ban Conversion Therapy Coalition. I chair that, and I chair an international group that is looking to ban conversion therapy too. So a lot of work going on.
Michael, do you have any addition to the explanations?
Well, some of the more formalized groups that we call conversion therapy groups are pretty crafty, pretty shifty in the way they respond to that. They will say, well, we don't do therapy. We just help people live proper Christian lives. We're not trying to convert anyone. So that doesn't apply to us. And so they'll say we don't do it. So just change the terminology and keep doing it? How do you ban it? And the defense that they give is, you know, in a free country, we have the right to free speech and freedom of religion. And if people want to pursue a particular religious path to try to change their sexual orientation, they have the right to do so. Why would you want to curtail religious freedom? They point out that most of the people that get involved in these programs are adults and that they go voluntarily. The thing is about that word voluntarily, it makes it sound like people are given accurate information on both sides of the question and they finally decide on something. It's not voluntary when a kid is told you're going to be rejected by your family, by your church, by your friends, and by society if you don't try to change. I was never presented the option that it was possible to live an integrated, healthy, gay life and still hold on to a sense of faith. I wasn't given an option. So I voluntarily got involved in one of these programs. But the consequences socially and in terms of support, if you don't voluntarily go, are so huge that you raise your hand and volunteer. I mean, who wouldn't? The ultimate, if you don't voluntarily do it, then even God's going to reject you and you're going to spend eternity in hell. That's not voluntary. That's psychological and religious indoctrination and coercion. So when people say, well, we did it voluntarily, that's not exactly true.
Well, thank you very much for all your answers. I would like to, at this point, to open the possibility to all our attendees to ask more questions directly to Jayne and Michael. Yes, please. I see a hand. Would you like to ask your question?
Hi, Jide.
Hello. Actually, I don't have a question, but I just have a lot of praise for Jayne and Michael. I want to say thank you so much, and of course to ReportOUT for making this available, because it is so important that we continue to talk about this abuse, you know, on the LGBT community. I mean, Jayne, every time you bring up your 2018 research, I could not but to go with envy in my heart and say, thank you so much. I mean, for reaching out to thousands of people. And of course, the impact, you know, of conversion therapy is painful. And for me personally, I find it very challenging that people are trying to cop out of it. They're trying to blame us for it. I'm a gay man from Nigeria, and I have been through conversion therapy. And Jayne, your slide is exactly what happened to me. I went through that time where I was the one feeling guilty, feeling painful, feeling sad. You know, the impact has been awful. It left me suicidal. I've tried to take my own life more than twice. I felt that I failed God. I felt that I failed my family, my culture, because I was told that, you know, Black people cannot be gay. So, but here we are today. I just want to say thank you. I don't want to take too much time because I don't have a question. Both of you have spoke so much with it from the depth of your emotions. And I want to thank you for your vulnerability. I think what I can say is that there's still a lack of appropriate theology to address this. I think that we're pursuing our government to provide laws, but I think at the end, we also need to pursue the church. We need to pursue the religious organizations that have put many of us at risk. We're fighting this in the UK, but we know that in Ghana today, the Anglican Church of Ghana is actually supporting a bill to criminalize queer people and force people into conversion therapy. And it breaks my heart. But nonetheless, I just want to echo my joy, my thanks to both of you today, and of course to ReportOUT. Needless to say, I'm a patron at ReportOUT. So.
Thank you, Jide. And Jide, I think it's in the chat, has put a link to his own research, which is really important amongst the Black community and their experiences of conversion therapy, which are often, well, it's just horrific. So you need to look at that research. But Jide, just on, you know, as you know, we made quite a stance against the the actions of the church in Ghana, and the Archbishop has had assurances that they are not supporting that bill. I know we doubt that, but that is directly as a result of the action that the LGBT Christian community took. I think the fact the Church of England has made a commitment to condemn conversion therapy is a first step. And I agree with you, we need more of a theology, but that will only come, I think, once the government has legislation in place, because then the real threat will be there. Tomorrow night, and there's a big plug coming, tomorrow night and Saturday night, Premier Radio are airing an interview between myself and the head of the Evangelical Alliance, Peter Linus. We went head to head for an hour on this thorny issue. I have to be honest, it's probably one of the most difficult interviews I've ever done. But I hope I demolish most of his arguments and indeed bring into the fore some of the damage that's going on. And if you're interested in this topic, you may want to look at Premier website tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. That's quite a big interview that probably needs, well, see what you think.
I see another hand. Tim Handley, please.
Hey, thanks very much to Jayne and Michael, and to Report Out. This has been really interesting, and I really value you sharing your own stories so powerfully, and your knowledge with all of us. There's an argument that I keep seeing cropping up, and I'm not really sure how to address it, or I'd be keen to get your thoughts on it. That basically goes along the lines of, if you try to criminalize conversion therapy, so Jayne, I think, spoke earlier on about criminal and civil sanctions, but that if you try to criminalize it, that you end up driving it underground, and so it becomes even less safe, that kind of idea. And I just wanted to know if you had thoughts on it, the sort of criminal as opposed to civil, or the combination of both that Jayne mentioned.
It's a really, really good question, Tim, and Michael may have views too. The truth is, it's already more or less underground, okay? You know, there's been so many groups now, medical groups and the Church of England condemning this, that it is virtually underground. And of course, you're right, so we risk that. However, and that's why we need whistleblowing and reporting mechanisms as part of the law, so that people can talk about, and we need social services and the police and GPs to be aware of people at risk. But the truth is, and I put this to Peter Linus yesterday, what's happened to most of us who've, you know, voluntarily gone through, not all of us, but most of us, we've done it because we thought it was really right. We've gone through it for years. We've hit a wall. We've had a breakdown. We've, you know, we've come out, and then we've realized that what we went through was abuse, and we've gone back and told them. And so, yes, they could go underground, but like any form of abuse, it will come back at them, and that will not be underground. And you know, so I still think it's right to criminalize, because there is the threat of that, but they need to know. And they're also, if you read, we haven't mentioned, but, you know, there are groups out there who are very, well, who are set on trying to undermine what I do, but who are very paranoid and saying that, you know, we will go and dress up and pretend to be members of their churches, and we'll try and trick them into doing conversion therapy. And indeed, a lot of journalists have gone to them and outed them and filmed them. So there is quite a wariness there, which has come because we've, you know, sought to bring this harm into the light. But I think ultimately they will be held to account, because too many people will ultimately, and I really wish they didn't have to suffer, but they will, after they've suffered, realize that what they've been through is abuse, which is Michael and my, well, I don't want to speak for Michael, but it's certainly my journey, and I think from what I've heard of Michael's journey, his too.
Thank you, Jayne. I think there's something to be said too about the message that the bans send to the general public, and especially to parents, that they may go underground, and they may be able to rename what they do to find a loophole in the regulations. But if enough organizations and enough states and localities ban this practice, especially for people who are licensed therapists, the message goes out that this is something that is very questionable. You know, this is something that needs to be banned. You raise public awareness. We haven't talked about the collateral damage to parents and to family members. We're told that their child is gay because of them. If we can tell parents, you know, there's nothing wrong with you, and there's nothing wrong with us as your children, as your gay and lesbian, transgender children. In fact, this is a practice that has been banned. You don't want to send your kids to something that's been discredited by every medical, social work, you know, scientific organization in the country, do you? No. Have you ever talked to people who have actually changed? Well, maybe you should talk to people who have been through these programs. Maybe you should listen to their stories. Are you aware of the fact that 26 former leaders of these programs have publicly denounced them and have signed a document explaining why they've denounced them? So I think the bans, even the fight to get the bans, can be educational. It can serve a purpose in terms of raising public awareness that this is something that we really ought to take a close look at and examine the real harm that it does. So the message sending is also an important part of the struggle to ban this. Can I put in a plug? There's one plug I'd like to do, and that's that just this past year, Netflix finally released a documentary film called Pray Away that got very good reviews, and it features 5 former leaders, including myself, 5 former leaders who are denouncing these programs and sharing their experience, and sadly one transgendered evangelical man who's still trying and still preaching it. But it's a very powerful film. It comes with a warning. It triggers some very strong feelings of abuse, especially for people who've been through it. But it's called Pray Away, and a number of churches have begun to do showings of the film and discussions afterwards, and I think that's been helpful too, and at least getting people to think about this, especially parents, to reconsider urging their children to get into something like this.
A very powerful documentary indeed. Thank you for this contribution. I see one last hand. Unfortunately, due to time, this will be the last question. Ali West.
Hi, thank you, Jayne and Michael, for what you shared tonight. I think it's really interesting. I'm conscious it's such a massive subject and a massive topic, global in scope, not just from a Christian evangelical background, but other faiths, other cultural groups, and other countries as well. I speak as a counsellor who works in the UK, in the northeast of England, registered with my professional body, British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy. And I'm wondering what your feelings are about what the therapeutic community is doing to raise their voices against this, and to challenge the view that conversion therapy is therapy, that it is anything other than harmful, that it is anything other than abuse. And just your thoughts on, kind of from your perspective, what your experiences are in relation to that.
Thanks, Ali. And there is a group, I think you're probably aware of it, called the Memorandum of Understanding Group, who signed, 26 organisations came together from the medical profession to sign a Memorandum of Understanding condemning conversion therapy. And that was government led to begin with. It was instrumental at getting this on the agenda, and is important. Not all conversion therapy happens in a religious setting, but the vast majority does. And it's been key that the medical professions have this standard now, if you like, and I think they're working hard to ensure that this ban would cover all settings. But if I may, I think where the medical profession are most needed is in picking up the pieces of those of us who've been through conversion therapy. It's the other end. And that's where I'd love to see them putting all their effort and energy, because that's what we need. We need safe places where people understand, where psychiatrists, psychologists, psychotherapists are open about the fact that they understand well, as much as they can, the trauma that people have been through, and are there as safe places. You know, the first person I came out to was my psychiatrist. And I told her that the reason I was having a breakdown was because I couldn't square my religion with my faith. And I remember her laughing at me and saying, well, that's simple, Jayne. You just change your faith. And I remember looking at her, and I never told another person for about 5 years, because I thought, you just do not get this. And if that's the response I'm going to get, then I can't talk about this to anyone in the medical profession. And sadly, you know, I know it's changed, but many in the medical profession see people of faith as people who need crutches. And so not all by any means, but a lot do. And so having people who are trained to understand this conflict, who understand the need to bring together, I mean, to be fair, that was a long time ago. I'm sure things have changed since, but who understand this conflict and who can be available to the LGBT community. That's what we really, really need. Now, obviously, we need to ensure that this isn't being practiced in therapy places, and that gets into complex problems around regulation and legislation. And I'm not sure that's going to be too useful for this call. And I know there's problems around that. But I really would urge the therapeutic community to focus on how they make services available. The government's giving funding. Let's make sure that we signpost people in the right direction, and that people don't get the response I did. Michael, I don't want to add to that.
Yes.
I do have a little film, Gabriel. I must say, it's 2 minutes. We're probably out of time, so we might not be able to share it, but I wanted to end on a positive note.
Yes, please. Yes, please. Absolutely. I think we can do 2 minutes. That's not a problem.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you may want to. Well, perhaps I'll show it now. It's just obviously religion has been the root cause of so much harm, and still is amongst many, and for many in the LGBT community. Me talking about my faith, or indeed people of faith, is the last straw. But things are changing. And in December 2020, you know, we brought together hundreds of religious leaders around the world to sign a declaration where they apologized for the way religion had been used. And they called for an international ban on conversion therapy. And that declaration, called The Dignity and Sanctity of Life, was made into a short film. And with your permission, it's 2 minutes. I'm going to play it. We made it during COVID, so I'm afraid it features UK senior faith leaders. There is one in front of the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. But it gives you a sense of those who are now coming together to really act and not just speak, but act to make change. I hope you can hear this. If you can't, someone's going to need to shout at me to change the microphone.
We come together as senior religious leaders, academics and lay leaders from around the world to affirm the sanctity of life and the dignity of all.
We affirm that all human beings of all sexual orientations, gender expressions, and gender identities are a precious part of creation and are part of the natural order.
We affirm that we are all equal under God, whom many call the divine, and that we are all therefore equal to one another. We call for all to be treated equally under the law.
We recognize with sadness that certain religious teachings have often, throughout the ages, caused and continue to cause deep pain and offense to those who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex.
We acknowledge with profound regret that some of our teachings have created and continue to create oppressive systems that fuel intolerance, perpetuate injustice, and result in violence. This has led and continues to lead to the rejection and alienation of many by their families, their religious groups, and their cultural communities.
We ask for forgiveness from those whose lives have been damaged and destroyed on the pretext of religious teachings.
We believe that love and compassion should be the basis of faith and that hatred can have no place in religion.
We call on all nations to put an end to criminalization on the ground of sexual orientation or gender identity, for violence against LGBT individuals to be condemned, and for justice to be done on their behalf.
We call for all attempts to change, suppress or erase a person's sexual orientation, gender identity or gender expression, commonly known as conversion therapy, to end, and for these harmful practices to be banned.
Finally, we call for an end to the perpetuation of prejudice and stigma, and commit to work together to celebrate inclusivity and the extraordinary gift of our diversity.
Beautifully done. Beautifully done. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing this video. Amazing. This call could not have ended any better. At this point, I would like to thank you all who have attended, and a special thank goes to Jayne and Michael who have shared their stories with us today. Please don't forget that you can make your voices heard on the government's consultation on conversion therapy in the UK. If you're interested, and you will find the link in the chat. I apologize for if there are any questions that due to time could not have been addressed. The donation links and the link to our website can be found in the chat. There are some upcoming events. I would just like to mention briefly that for February, the end of February, we have an event on Lebanon and LGBTQ+ activism in Beirut. If you're interested, you will find the information in our newsletter. Would you, Jayne and Michael, say anything, last words to our dear guests?
Well, I believe that love is something beautiful. God is love, and where there is love, I believe God finds a home. And so I just hope that if there's anybody on this call who's still struggling, come and talk to us afterwards. If you're feeling incensed about conversion therapy, make your voice known. And if you want to get involved in my work, or indeed Michael's work, a quick Google will find my foundation. I know ReportOUT are plugging for funds. We too need funds to do the work we're doing. I hadn't realized this was a fundraising thing for ReportOUT, but please, I know everybody asked for funding, but that's what we need, just to be able to keep going and to create videos like the one you've just seen. Thank you.
I just want to thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Jayne. Thank you for all who tuned in. I don't have a foundation. I'm just a retired old therapist, but I'm available on Facebook and certainly welcome any kind of contact or inquiry there.
Just to jump in quickly, I have put a link to Jayne's foundation website in all of the links, and a link to the documentary trailer for Pray Away, where you can see Michael feature.
Thank you very much.
With this, I wish you all a good evening and a lovely day. Thank you for attending.
Thank you and God bless.
Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful to meet you, Jayne.
You too, Michael. Seriously, and I mean, obviously, Exodus was somewhere where and Leanne Payne and all that lot I knew of and was getting prayed for by people who've been involved with that. But it's lovely to see us both on the other side. And I was blown away by it really did. I had to take a day off after I watched it. It really did trigger quite a lot, but it was
I know.
good to know.
I'm going to need to leave now. But,
yeah. Thank you. And
you,
good
Brenda.
to meet the Report Out team.
Converse with you again.
Thank you so much.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.